Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education Committee, the whole meeting for October 14th, 2024. We're going to get started right away on our agenda. We are going to go ahead to item 1, audience communications. I do not see any blue slips, and I don't see anybody in the audience wishing to speak at this time. So we're going to go on to item 2, the Committee of the Whole. And Mrs. Oquist, do we have anything this evening for the Committee of the Whole?
We do not, President Bradford. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to go on to item 3, Building and Site Committee, and I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Burton. Good evening, Mrs. Burton.
Thank you. We have one item on the agenda this evening. It is a very short agenda. We are going to be hearing from Mr. Francis on the bulk salt purchase.
It's our favorite item
It is
of
our
the year, or
annual,
one of
yes, our
items
annual
we
bulk salt
enjoy.
purchase.
Exactly.
Good evening.
Good evening, everybody.
Hello.
How's it going this evening for everyone? I know
Going
you've
well.
been waiting all week last
Yes.
week for the bulk salt
The
purchase.
very exciting bulk salt purchase.
As usual at this time of year, I'm bringing to the board for approval a request to purchase bulk salt. Bulk salt is the road salt that we use throughout the year. As you may know, out on this property in the south end of it, southwest end of it, we have a very large area where we store the bulk salt. And last year, we do have quite a bit left from last year because we didn't have quite the winter, as everyone recalls, that we normally expect. This year, the predictions are, and what we're understanding is that it's going to be making up for lost time with regard to winter weather. So we are coming to the board with a recommendation of a 1,000-ton purchase from the State of Michigan My Deal Purchasing Consortium, and the cost is $60.35 per ton. So that would come to $60,350.
Comments, questions on this item? Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Mr. Francis, I note the increase this year in the cost per ton. How does that compare to past years, if you know?
We generally do get an increase annually. I didn't do the math on percentages and comparing year over year, but it is a general increase. The My Deal is where most of the districts get their salt, and that is, like I said, a consortium priced item for us. Buying in bulk always going to be much better than buying one-offs. We have a requirement to purchase at least 80% of what we put on the order, and we can also purchase more than if we need.
If we were to purchase more, is that the same price?
Yes, it has that variance of that 20% plus or minus.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions on this item?
I have a question.
Oh, go right ahead. Jump right in.
It's a question for the board. I think in the past couple of years with paper and bulk salt, you've been putting them on consent.
Yes.
Just wanted to bring it up if you were interested. I'm good either way.
I'm perfectly fine with that. Other board members, are you all right with that?
Okay.
Yes. Let's do that. Consent agenda. All righty. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that concludes Building and Site. I think that's the world's record shortest Building and Site meeting ever.
Nice work, Mrs. Burton. Nice work.
Yeah, did
All
a
right,
lot.
we're going to go on to item 4, the Curriculum Committee, and I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Acosta.
Thank you, President Bradford. And we actually have probably some of the bulk of the items for this evening. Item 4A is adult education laptop purchase, and we'll have Mr. E2 presenting.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Yes, this is for the adult education program, which is supervised by Ms. Karen Ling in requesting the purchase of new HP ProBook notebook laptop computers. This would be through contract pricing for a total cost for 60 laptops of $57,473.40 through CDWG. The purchase is budgeted as part of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act Title II Adult Education Grant, and it'll be used for our adult education students in ESL, high school completion, and adult basic education.
Thank you. Any questions? Mrs. Burton?
Mr. E2, do these computers stay in our facilities, or do they go home with our students?
I will confirm that with Ms. Ling. I'm
Okay.
not sure the answer to that. It's a good question.
Either way is fine, but
Yeah.
they always used to stay, I mean, all of our technology pieces used to stay
In-house.
in-house until COVID years happened, and we kind of changed how we operated. So I was wondering if it was the same
No, I'll
with
confirm with
this.
her if she has a process for them to check it out or something like that for the
Yeah.
evening and things like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, this goes on for the voting meeting.
Yes.
Oh, one other quick thing, just, this is being paid for out of a grant.
Correct.
This is not coming out of our general funds.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Welcome. And yes, for the voting meeting, please.
Perfect, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, moving on to item 4B, purchase of Chromebooks. Mr. Francis.
Good evening again.
Good evening.
I'm here to bring to the board a proposed purchase of 3,600 new Chromebooks. This is a combination of replacement as well as some additional Chromebooks. So to start, we have 2,500 that we're replacing the Surface Pros that we have in the secondary buildings. So that would be a one-for-one replacement on those. And then when we began this conversation of purchasing Chromebooks, both secondary, the secondary director, Mr. Etu, who was just at the table speaking with you, as well as the director of student services, Mrs. Sproul, we had conversations about the need for some more Chromebooks. Secondary numbers, the carts, while they hold, I believe, up to 35 or 36, they don't have that many in it. We try to be efficient with what the needs are. But at the secondary level, we have found through the principals and Mr. Etu bringing this to cabinet, saying that they're generally, there's obviously at the secondary buildings, you have different class sizes from hour to hour, from teacher to teacher. So it's not a simple, consistent number. And to be prudent, we don't just over-purchase and just put them full everywhere. So what's going on is you might have your first hour class, you have enough in your cart, but second hour might not quite have enough. So you go next door and you borrow a couple from your neighbor, et cetera. So we want to make that good and not have folks have to go borrow them from their neighboring teachers. So we had a count from the secondary end, and then we had a count at the resource room providers needed them for their classrooms as well. So we have from elementary and secondary a need in the resource rooms for students to use them. They might come down, work with a teacher, do some work via the Chromebook. We have so much more now between Google Classroom and so many different projects that can be done on the Chromebooks. So we needed to buy some additional there. So Mrs. Sproul found that number for us. So we went back and got an overall quote for the 3,600 and the configuration. So what we're bringing to the board is awarding the purchase to People Driven Technology in the amount of $1,400,364 and all covered Konica Minolta for $45,000. That was the number we were waiting on, and I got this in time last week back from them. They did a nice job of turning that around for us because that's the configuration work. That's the actual putting hands on all of the machines, setting them up, getting them into the carts, et cetera. So our overall purchase here is of the 3,600 Chromebooks plus the configuration with all covered Konica Minolta. And again, that was the total price of $1,445,364. It's going to be funded through the 2021 bond. We do have dollars purposely in the IT bond budget lines for replacement of Chromebooks. And the bid pricing is from the MHEC bid pricing and consortium contract. So that has satisfied the boards. And this is what we usually do with the Chromebooks, is satisfy the district's requirement to bid.
Questions, comments? Mrs. Bonnefield.
Mr. Francis, when the carts have just enough Chromebooks on them, it really probably spurs people to make sure that they're repaired or replaced. If there's spares sometimes on the cart, depending on class sizes, is there a requisition form or a way to make sure that the ones that are in need of repair don't just kind of sit there for a while? They make sure that they come back and get repaired, even though there may be, if there's 36 on the cart and really they only need 35, that one just kind of sits out there unrepaired?
Absolutely, and I'll answer your question, but just also to clarify, if folks at home are not quite understanding, or if I did a poor job of explaining the reason for the additional, is that there aren't spares right now. They're taking from each other and saying, my first hour, I need a little more, and then they go back to here, and sometimes they don't get back, et cetera. So we want to have enough. And anytime there's a Chromebook or any IT issue, we have an online work order system. So our staff know that if there was an issue with their particular, like this specific Chromebook, they all have numbers. They can go on to the web. It's on every computer in the district. You click the icon and you put in a work order. I will say with certainty and with pride that our IT department and the techs, we have 4 techs, 1 for each of the triads, and the 4th who takes care of central office and then supports any of the other 3. I hear all the time from folks in the building that they are always Johnny on the spot. They come by, they help out, they take care of. So if they got a work order for a Chromebook, or more realistically, maybe a few of them that had some issues, they would be right on that, replace and then repair, so that we can make sure that we have those correct numbers, but also the numbers with regard to how many Chromebooks, but also making sure that the right serial numbers are in the right place so we can track them.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
And we actually upgraded and updated the work order system for both maintenance and IT. It's a cleaner interface, it's easy to use, and folks have access, everybody has access to it.
Mrs. Burton?
Mr. Francis, those that we're taking out of circulation, is there going to be any value to them? And if so, are we going to be selling them, auctioning them? Are they going to be used some
They
other
generally
way?
get recycled. With Chromebooks, they only last so long. They're only supported for a certain number of years. And we've talked, you might remember in the past, we talk about Google is no longer going to support them because it's been X number of years. It's usually like 4 or 5 years. They really, it's a sad thing to say that they're pretty much a limited
Disposable.
recycle. Yes, they're disposable. That's the word I was thinking. Thank you. They're like a disposable item. So that's why we put into the bond line items in the budget for IT, because we know that we have to continually be on that cycle.
Okay, so we won't be getting any monetary value, but we can just at least be assured they'll be disposed of
Yes.
properly and not.
Correct. And they get used, because if they weren't getting used, we wouldn't be hearing from student services and secondary department saying, please, we need more. We have kids who want to and need to
Okay.
use them.
Okay, good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Mr. Francis, and that will be voted on
For next week,
next
yes.
week.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item 4C, the PACE Lab. Ms. Sproul? We're moving quickly, sorry.
Hello. This is like rapid fire switch of presenter tonight. I like it. It is, it is. Well, thank you for having me here this evening to talk about the PACE Lab, which is a practical assessment exploration system for our high school age students in special education programs. So this lab, a few of our teachers had the opportunity to go out to other schools to see this lab in practice before we brought this to you tonight. And really what it does is breaks down real life skills that students have to do at a job site so that we can practice them in a classroom environment, and it breaks it down step by step. So for example, if you're working on alphabetizing in a library, there are many steps that go into that, so it breaks it down into isolated skills so that we can do pre-test assessments, we can find out where the breakdown is, and then we can help teach students to be able to do those skills out in the community ultimately. So this PACE Lab includes 264 different job tasks that it teaches to students. It includes a workbench and all of the shelving so that we can store the materials for students to have real-world practice with. And then it can be an elective for students to work on job skills in the school environment. So our hope for this program is that it initially starts with our Churchill, ASD, and center-based programming. And then as we build success and get comfortable with the program, we'd love to have our Franklin Transition Program students come over to Churchill as well to be able to experience this program. So yeah, so this comes out of our discretionary Act 18 budget, so they give us discretionary funds to use for big projects like this, and this is something that we would like to use some of those funds to provide for our students. The staff over at Churchill is super excited and supportive of this plan, and they've indicated a specific classroom that we could use to store the materials and for instruction.
I love everything about this, everything. And I think there will be other students who will be really excited to be able to have that opportunity. So I love this.
Absolutely.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Costa. Mrs. Brown, what's the time frame for this? How soon do we get it?
So it's a pretty quick turnaround. When we were initially looking at this, they said it would be 4 to 6 weeks from the time that we placed the order until they could arrange for delivery. They also do the setup for us, and then they'll come in and do a day of professional development. So I think it's going to be more dependent on when we can release our teachers to get the true training. I would hate for this to land without giving them that true professional development.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Mrs. Sproul, you mentioned that there's a classroom area that's going to be dedicated. Is it a dedicated space where that's what the space will be for, or is it in a part of a classroom that's already being used for something else?
This would be a dedicated classroom space because there are a lot of materials that have to come in and be put away again. So to share that with another, elective or program could be difficult.
So
Things
this
might
will
walk
be
away. Yeah.
available for the students on demand and.
Yeah.
and great, thank you.
Thanks.
Mrs. Burton?
And Mrs. Sprout, I see on our information that you sent over for us that it's got a prepaid app renewal for, it looks like 5 years. Okay, so this cost will cover us for 5 years then for the equipment and the app so we can use it properly.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. Yes, so this is a program that's run off of an app so that you can collect data on how students are doing and making progress. So you run it on your iPad, you get 5 years of use of the program, which they update as new programs come along, and is there a new teaching skills available as well. It'll be updated during those 5 years, and then we can continue to renew that for $1,500 a year after that time.
That was my next
Thank
question
you.
is can we keep the equipment and continually use,
Yes.
continually update the software? For a total of $44,000, it sounds to me like a great value for how much our students can truly gain out of it. So
I think
that's
so.
pretty exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Mrs. Bonnefield?
Since it's app-based, and you talk about renewals, is there an opportunity as time goes on, when there's new skills that sort of come up over, right? We've got AI and some other stuff going on, that the skills will be updated for current technology, and then also maybe some additional job skills that start to surface will be added to it?
Yeah, that's what the company is intending. This is not a new program. This is something that's been around for a bit of time. So they have certainly changed the different tasks and job responsibilities that they're tracking on. They've updated their software as they've been going along. Our community partners, our other community school districts that have used this program has been very impressed by this, and they can't speak highly enough about it. So my belief is that they're going to continue to update this and have really great information available.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's it for us. Thank you so much,
Thank
Ms. Brown.
you.
This will be on the voting meeting. Thank you. Moving on to item 4D, 35J purchases. Mrs. O'Brien. I tried to speak slower, but.
You did a great job. You did a great job. Hello. Are we excited to spend some of our grant money that we got last year? Because I am. I am very excited to bring some purchases from our 35 35J grant that we received last year that is for literacy improvement in the school district. As you know, last year we purchased funds to provide decodables for our intervention teachers, training in Orton Gillingham and morphology. We purchased some of the materials that go with Orton Gillingham, our 5th grade ELA student texts. So anything for your Tier 1 or your Tier 2 curriculum that we put into that grant could be utilized. And so Mrs. Corey, our elementary curriculum director, had put into the grant some decodable text, some additional titles for kindergarten and 2nd grade. 1st grade, being that year where more students are beginning to fly with their phonics and phonemic awareness and applying that to their reading, we already purchased a nice strong set of materials at 1st grade with just a few at kindergarten and a few at 2nd grade. So she would like us to purchase more decodable books for them. That purchase would be from Pioneer Valley, and I did notice on the board, your board book, that the quote was not there for the Pioneer Valley books. So this purchase is for $139,311. It would provide different classroom packs for both kindergarten and 2nd grade teachers. We do utilize Pioneer Valley for different instructional resources, so it's a known company that we trust, and we like their materials. They're very engaging. A lot of their nonfiction have great photography in them. And so this purchase would support our Tier 1 curriculum. So they would be appropriate at the kindergarten level for students at kindergarten level, and then the 2nd grade at a 2nd grade phonics and reading level. So that purchase is part of our 35J grant. And then some planning for the year that we put into the grant would be to provide teachers with $1,000 for a general education classroom for their classroom libraries. So most teachers, in addition to having a school library, have hundreds of books in their classroom. They buy leveled text, they buy new picture books, they buy the current books out of Scholastic, and many teachers utilize their own funds for that. And so when the opportunity to put this into the grant to provide teachers with the opportunity to buy books for their classroom libraries, we jumped at that chance. The grant is, fits the needs of preschool through 5th grade. So we utilize that, but we would also like to purchase books for our 6th grade classrooms and our resource room classrooms. In your memo, it says the same amount of money, the $1,000, but those classrooms, we had agreed upon a $500 limit. So I'm not sure how that got changed in the memo, but our total amount of $350,000 actually represents $500 for a 6th grade classroom and $500 for a resource room classroom. So the total purchase for libraries would be from the grant mostly, but some general funds because that grant ended at 5th grade. So that purchase, Mrs. Smith and I are creating a process for schools to order so that we get an itemized order for each teacher. So if I use my Scholastic account and have a plan for that, then I would use that order form as the quote to say what I'm spending my money on. We would have a process for it to be reviewed and then purchased and applied to the grant. And then the last thing that we would like to utilize that we put into the grant funds is to begin to plan for those student books. So last year we ran out of time. They finally put the money out very late in the school year. And so again, talking with Mrs. Smith, being much more proactive, this is very early for us to be planning for students to have 5 books to take home, but we want to have a better process so that we can track those purchases this year. And that purchase for all of our preschool through 5th grade students to get 5 books, probably beginning after spring break, so it's not right at the end of the school year, would be a total of $324,000 from the grant. And so this literacy purchase of all three things would be a total of $813,311 that we're looking to purchase.
Thank you. Questions or comments?
Sounds great.
We're excited.
Oh, I have a question.
President Bradford.
Thank you. The grant is so awesome, and this is great. I think the teachers are going to be just thrilled to be able to shop for their classrooms. How much will be left over in the grant, and how do we have a certain time limit to spend all the money in?
So the grant goes till September of '25.
Okay.
So the things we have not finished purchasing, so we purchased the vouchers for teachers to take Orton Gillingham or morphology. So we buy a voucher and then a teacher puts in a code to take the training. We also put into the grant the after-school PD pay for teachers to take that training, so that won't have been spent probably until the end of June.
Okay.
And then we have some professional development resources that we put in there. So striking the balance, which is about how literacy, we want to make sure we have a balance of phonics in addition to grade level reading, which we've been utilizing that book with our coaches and our CALs and some of our elementary teacher leaders, but we put into the grant to buy every teacher that book. So we have not bought that yet. Mrs. Corey has a professional development plan on how to roll that out to all of our staff. So we have until the end of next September to make sure, but I have budgeted to spend all of it. So, if there's a little left over,
Every
we'll find a
penny.
way to hand
Utilize
some
it.
books to some new kids or something.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Love that answer. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we'll be voting on this at the next meeting.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes the curriculum committee report.
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. All right, we're going to move on to item 5, our finance committee, and I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Bonifield.
Wow, everything's been moving so swiftly today, and I'm going to put a big stop to that. So Mrs. Smith is going to help us with our financial update.
Thank you. In just a moment, I'll invite our friends from Plant Moran to join us, but I'll take a minute first and give an update for our community of what we went over during our study session, which is a look back at last year and how our actual expenditures and revenue came in compared to budget, and then also a look ahead to the 24-25 school year and share some additional information that's come to light. I thank you because we were able to set a significant amount of time together last Monday to go over these in detail. So I know this is all old news to you, but again, just thought we'd take a minute for our community and share what I think is very good news. Our actual revenue for this past school year came in within 0.3% of the budget, which is awesome. So yeah, we're happy to have it come in so close. That came in favorably by 0.3%, and primarily that was in the category of local revenue. And two specific line items: property taxes came in higher than budgeted, and then our Wayne County Enhancement Millage also came in higher than budgeted. And I shared last week that with the Wayne County Enhancement Millage, I'm primarily looking at last year's revenue collection and also looking at property tax values and what they've done over the past year to come up with an idea of what to budget for Wayne County Enhancement Millage. So it's not an exact science, but that kind of gives us a good ballpark. And with that said, it came in more favorably. So that's reflected on our actual expenditure or actual revenue. On the expenditure side, we came in within 1.1% of budget. So again, I think that is great. The main category that came in under budget was what's called other support services, and that's where we record our athletic expenditures. And as I shared last week, we were fortunate to have gotten a number of grants during the pandemic. One specific one was our Section 11T grant, and when that grant came to us, they had very, very restrictive uses for the funds, and then we were made aware by the Michigan Department of Education that they had changed some of those restrictions, and so they encouraged us to, relook at identifying allowable expenditures to the grant. So we were able to submit a budget amendment after the board adopted the June final amendment, but within the time frame of the grant still. So we were able to shift some of our general fund athletic expenditures over to that grant, which made that line item come in with 25% under budget. So that was, again, as we talked about last week, just a one-time shift of those expenditures over to the Funded Projects Fund, and those are funds or expenditures that we've included in our proposed budget for the 24-25 school year, because we know that those will be ongoing expenditures. But we welcome the relief to the general fund for that 1 year, so that is great news, and that's something that we've taken into to reflect for our budget for this 24-25 school year. As we discussed, a couple things have come to light since we passed our budget in June. As you all know, we have to adopt a budget in June, and that's oftentimes before the legislators have established their budget for schools for the year. So in June, we had planned for a $241 per pupil increase, and that didn't come to fruition. Instead, they went another direction and created a new categorical revenue called Section 147A4, which was meant to be an offset to the retirement costs that school districts incur for staff. And so that is equating to 5.75% of the retirement rate that we incur as an employer and remit to ORS. They're giving us this revenue to help cover that cost. So that has been communicated to us originally that was a one-time categorical funding. What we now know that we, again, talked about last week was for the next year, that is going to become a permanent reduction. And instead of incurring the costs, we will simply be able to lower the retirement rate. So that is wonderful news. So that means that come December, when we do our final budget amendment, we'll be able to recognize some additional revenue coming in for the 24-25 school year, which is great. And one item that we had talked about last week was also adjusting expenditures. One thing I think administration and the school board have been very aware of and conscious of is one-time revenues, and the idea that we do not want to build an ongoing budget based on one-time revenues that come and go. So because we got this one-time opportunity to shift some costs from the general fund over to the grant, we'd like to use the opportunity to again transfer some funds from the general fund over to our capital projects fund so that we can use those for one-time expenditures. And as we know, looking at our 10-year facility plan, we have lots of needs. We're very fortunate in this community to have a community that supports us through the bond proposal that was passed in 2021 and through our sinking fund. But even with those two revenue sources, we still have identified projects that aren't going to be covered by those two sources. So whenever we can set aside some money to address those capital projects, it's always a good idea. And so we talked about including that in our December amendment as well. So the bottom line for our community, happy to report that we're still looking to end the school year, this 24-25 school year, with a fund balance that is well within the recommended range that Michigan School Business Officials recommends, which is 15 to 20%. We would be looking at an 18.8% fund balance, or $33.5 million. So great news that we're able to accomplish all that we're able to accomplish and still be very sound financially. So that is a very quick overview of what we talked about last week. I'll pause there if you have any questions or clarifications. Otherwise, I will invite Lisa Vargo and Tom Marchese from Plant Moran to join us.
Mrs. Burton.
Just a bit of a clarification for our public. You explained it really well, and those of us at the table in this room understand it. But I'd like to thank the members of our education team, our education world largely, and some of our public who contacted our legislators over the summer and let them know that a zero increase in per pupil funding was not just balanced out by other line items. The problem with as you know, but the public may not, the problem with the other line items is those are very restricted in use and they're one time only. Yeah. So when we have a budget that is 90% salaries and benefits, because we are a people serving people institution, I mean, that's appropriate. But therefore, those one-time dollars that have a very, very strict line item associated with them do not help the vast majority of our expenses that we incur on a regular basis.
Yep.
So,
Absolutely. And just to speak to that, we just saw it this past year, just reiterating what you just said, that when it's a foundation allowance, it's very odd that you would then see the legislators take that away. So it's revenue that you can count on receiving for years in the future. With a categorical funding, those are kind of, separate line items. They can very easily cut it, and we saw it with school safety and mental health.
yep,
We saw that introduced to schools. It was roughly $150 million each year, so they did a $300 million spread over 2 years. School safety and mental health, wouldn't have imagined to see a cut in that, and in their initial budget for this school year, they cut that by, it was 92%.
yep.
That's devastating. That's, if you counted on that and you hired new psychologists and social workers and security staff, then you'd be scrambling this year then to find out what are you gonna do. So that one-time fund, or those line items are definitely more easily cut than the foundation allowance. So we're always a little weary when they add the funds to the separate line items. So good news on that front, as we did share during their supplemental, they did put some more additional funding towards the mental health and safety. So we're yet to see exactly what the final dollar amount will be for us, but I'm encouraged, again, because people reached out and shared concern that they have once again addressed that. So.
Sounds good, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thank you, Mrs. Smith. And
Yes.
now the grand finale.
Thank you. These will be familiar faces, as you know. Lisa Vargo and Tom Marchese from Plant Moran are our external auditors. They're going to walk through some of the testing and the processes and procedures they were looking at this past summer. And as we shared in the packet are some key reports from our financial statements that they also want to walk through with the board tonight. So with that, I will turn it over.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank
Sorry,
you.
Lisa.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here today. So my name is Lisa Vargo. I'm a partner at Plant Moran in our K-12 group. And with me is Tom Marchese, a principal in our K-12 group as well. So what we figured we would do here, I think everyone's got a summary of our draft package that we wanted to go through. What we did is we snipped and we brought together some of what we thought some of the highlights that we can kind of go through in this group. Make it interactive. As we have questions, we'll pause and see as we have questions. When we go for the board meeting, we'll do the graphs as we traditionally do. So before we dive into a lot of the information, I just want to really kind of take a step back and really talk about how we're here and what we do to really kind of get here. So of course we're historians mostly, so we're looking at old numbers mostly, but in order to get here, we do have to go through a lot of processes. So the way that I think about it, I group it into 3 types of groups. We have to assess financial controls that Allison has in her department. We have to look at the financial controls. We have to assess them. We're not putting an opinion on those controls, but we do have to assess them. We have to make sure that those controls are set up strong enough so that there's segregation of duties, that there's controls in that department for the financial numbers, that they're going to be able to detect errors, correct errors, and identify errors. And if we, as auditors, have judgment, and if we think that controls are missing, we have an obligation as auditors to report that to this committee. So that's one thing. And then from there, we have to create our audit procedures in order to audit the financial statements. Then we have to do compliance testing, and we'll talk a little bit more about what program that is and how those programs rotate. In that compliance testing, we have to do a compliance audit in order whatever that major program is. And not only do we have to do an opinion on that compliance, but then we also have to put an opinion on the controls around the compliance. So we are putting, so not only do we have to say yes, the compliance was correct, but do you also have controls over this compliance? So there's a lot that kind of goes into that process as well. Lucky for Allison, we also had to have new auditing standards this year. So not only as we're going through all these processes, the auditing standards came out and said, as auditors, we are now required to, I'll just call it, kick the tires even more than we've had to in the past. We have to ask more questions, we have to dig down a little bit more, we have to really document more risk, which, what does that mean? From our aspect, we have to ask more questions, we have to document more. We probably asked more questions than we have in the past. So those are auditing standards 143 and 145, so that was new this year. Allison did a great job, her department did a great job, so we thank you. So that's kind of like the background of what we have to do to be able to be here today. So there was a lot that goes into it. Then we issue the 3 deliverables. So you have the basic financial statement, so that's the big financial report. And then you have the single audit report, so that's the one that's required for the federal government. And then we do the end of audit letter. So the end of audit letter really has 2 pieces to it. There's the one that has the required communication from the auditing standards, and then we like to just put the Plant Moran some additional information there about what we know what's going on. But Allison already did a great summary about a lot of the from the state of Michigan and the additional funding and how they're doing a lot of the foundations and the categoricals, and we'd like to put that in there too. So those are really the summary of all the deliverables that we'd like to kind of hand out to you. So with that, we can kind of jump into the package here. So the first letter here, this is what we refer to as our independent auditor's report. This is the opinion on the basic financial statement. I like to say this is primarily what we're hired to do. This is our opinion report, that all that work that we kind of talked about, this is what we are essentially hired to do. So I'm happy to report that we are giving an unmodified opinion. So it's not a very fancy word, but it is at the highest level of assurance that we can provide that your financial statements are free of material misstatement. So clean audit report, congratulations. So that's great. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom so he can dive into some more of the detailed numbers.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all again. So with that, we'll start on the page that reads Statement of Revenue, Expenditures, and Changes in Fund Balance. This is the fund level income statement. The district has 3 major funds in fiscal year 24. It's going to be your general fund, that's your day-to-day operating fund, the special education fund, and the 2021 Bond Series 2 fund. You'll see a phantom column, that's what they deem it in accounting terminology, for the formerly major 2021 Bond Series 1 fund. So that just means that the fund was major last year, it's now non-major. So that's required to be shown up as part of one of the new accounting standards that had become effective this year. The most significant revenue sources for the district are state aid and local property taxes. Federal revenues in the general fund decreased as non-recurring COVID grants were spent down. And the district earned $6.2 million across the funds in investments during fiscal year 24, capitalizing on the favorable market conditions. So that was good to see. Expenditures in the general fund and district-wide remain consistent with the prior year. And you can see a continued capital spending through the voter-approved Series 2 bond. So capital outlay in that fund was $42 million this year. One of the helpful metrics that Ms. Smith had previously alluded to was the fund balance as a percent of expenditures. And so, as she had stated, it's 16% in the general fund. MSBO recommends that 15 to 20% window, so you're well within that range. The statewide average as of fiscal year 2023 was 21%. So that's the latest data available. You're slightly below the statewide average, but you know, we expect that to tick downward as COVID funds dry up. So.
And that average, it's always a difficult average too, because it's everything. So like you're throwing in charter schools in there. It's a good measurable because but it is everything. So you know.
Tom, did you say 20%?
21%. as of fiscal year '23. So those are dated numbers. And this also includes your funded projects. The general fund listed on this page is the combined general fund. So your funded projects plus your standalone general fund. I'll get into it a bit more on the later pages with the funded projects, but this is a common accounting technique that's used by districts to account for restricted grants and put all of it in one break-even fund.
I usually like to think about the trend that the overall, like what's going, so the previous year it was at 20% and then it went up to 21%. So the trend was that it went up, 1%. So I think that's indicative of overall what a lot of the districts were doing.
Great point. So, the last point here is just as stewards of the district resources, fund balance is incredibly important. Ms. Smith had alluded to it earlier. It affords the district with flexibility to navigate uncertainties, withstand cuts, the categorical uncertainties in the future. So it allows you to be in less of a reactionary mode and avoids disruptions to spending plans at the district. So while you may see $33 million in the general fund balance, a district of this size, that represents 16% of total expenditures, which, it's just important to keep in mind. And having a positive fund balance also improves bond ratings, so it reduces interest costs that are paid by the community, along with reducing interest costs that might need to happen if you need bridge financing in July and August to sustain not getting the state aid funding until October. So very important to have fund balance. The following page is the budgetary comparison schedule for the general fund. So this excludes the funded projects activity, which we'll go into on the next page. As Ms. Smith has stated, the board's legally required to pass a budget, and she summarized that the total revenue came in within 0.3% of the final budget, which is great. Expenditures came in favorably by 1% as well. This demonstrates management's careful monitoring of finances and expected changes in funding as well. So we typically see sound budgeting practices range from 1% to 3%. The district is well within that range, below it. So that's great to see. The next page is the funded projects component of the general fund. So it represents the various restricted grants from state and federal resources, and it's a component of the combined general fund. It operates as a break-even, so you can see the net change in fund balance across the original and final budgets along with the actual is zero. There's no fund balance at the end of the year either. The final budget included revisions from the original budget based on just the final funding measures that were passed by the state, which included increased categorical funding. So with that, there were a few total revenue came in $5 million below the final budget. That was a result of unspent state categorical revenues. The funding was deferred to fiscal year '25 though. You can see a matching or corresponding decrease in the expenditures too for fiscal year '24. So where revenue came in under budget, expenditures did as well.
I'll just speak to that for a minute. It's become our custom to budget and bring before you the full amount that we've been awarded by the different granting agencies. So in this case, $30 million was awarded to us in various grants. Even if we do have an intended plan to maybe carry over some funds, we always bring that kind of maximum authorization to the board, because then it gives us the most flexibility as far as if we decide, oh, we actually do want to use more of those 31A funds this year. So that variance is something that you'll see from year to year, and that's again just because we bring to you our full authorization of what's been awarded to the district, even if we did have plans to carry over to the next year. And I want to point out, as we talked about, this is related to the Section 11T grant as well. You'll see something unusual that you normally don't see, that under expenditures, the community services, you can see that is actually over budget, and that's related to that Section 11T grant. So as part of the amended budget that the MDE approved was moving over some athletic costs that we talked about, as well as some SAC costs, because they allowed us to identify costs that were incurred before and after school and charge a portion of it as it relates to our economically disadvantaged subgroup population and move that over to the grants. So that was something that we hadn't intended to do when we brought a final amendment to you in June, but afterwards got some additional approval, and we thought that that would be what the board would want us to do, is to take advantage of those grant funds. So that's why that particular line item is over budget, because we got additional grant funds for that purpose after our final amendment.
Just the last final point on this page too is just involving the COVID funding. So the district has spent down in the form of the ESSER programs $30 million, which was set to expire as of September of 2024. So just the business office, the board, you all deserve praise for being able to maximize that funding and use it appropriately. Over the course of our compliance testing on that ESSER program, we had no compliance findings, so you spent it under allowable uses as well.
Excited to say goodbye to that. That one is fully expended as of June 30th, so that's not something you'll see in our budget for next year or in the financial statements next year.
So the following page is the governmental funds balance sheet, and this just lists out your assets, liabilities, and fund balance. Your assets are largely comprised of your state aid receivables, along with certain cash, investment, and restricted asset balances. Those restricted assets relate to assets that service your debt and account for your bond proceeds that are due to be spent on capital projects. Your liabilities are largely represented by AP from those capital projects from bond spending, along with the summer pays due to the teachers. Your fund balance is broken up into a few different classifications. So $47 million of the fund balance is restricted for debt service, bonded capital projects, and food service. The other portion here is assigned. The subsequent year budget you'll see in the general fund has a $1.4 million balance. That's a planned use of fund balance that was adopted by the board, where the expenditures in fiscal year 25 are slated to exceed the revenues by $1.4 million. So it's listed as assigned in the 2024 balance sheet. And that leaves unassigned fund balance of $31.5 million in the general fund. And this final page is your statement of net position. This is a full accrual balance sheet, so where the fund focuses on current and measurable resources, current and available resources. This will include your long-term assets, long-term liabilities. Some of the bigger numbers on here don't show up on the fund level, so you have your capital assets of $382 million. You'll have pension and OPEB-related obligations. The biggest number on here is your net pension liability of $350 million. And then you'll have your bonds as well. The bonds are about $295 million of liabilities that are on the statement of net position. One final observation is your total net position. You'll see that it's in a deficit position. That's not going to be uncommon across the state, just based on the allocated share of these retirement system liabilities that go on to all the district books. So each district is allocated a share based on contributions that they make to the retirement system. And you can see the net pension liability is $350 million of added liabilities. Without that, it would flip the net position to a positive amount. We are, on a positive note, the OPEB plan was sufficiently funded as of June 30, 2024, so you'll see a net OPEB asset of $6.2 million in the asset section. So that's largely related to the market conditions that have occurred, net investment returns within the plan, earning more than they had estimated initially. So it's great to see. And I'll pass it back over to Lisa to cover the single audit along with the end of audit letter.
Yep. All right, so the single audit, I alluded to a little bit of the single audit testing when we first started talking. So this is what we refer to as the schedule of finding and questions costs. So this is kind of like the summation of everything that happened in the single audit program. So this year, we tested one major program. So the major program we tested this year was the IDEA program. So the way that we identify which major program we test, it usually has to rotate every single year based on a lot of factors, coverage of what was spent this year, what was tested in the past. It's like usually every few years we have to rotate programs, regularly. So this year, IDEA was up in rotation, so we tested that one. We did not have, as I indicated earlier, we had no compliance findings. When we test for compliance, it's right, it's wrong. So the federal government has a list of items that we have to go through, and we have to make sure that the program's is operating the way it should be operated. And then we, as I also indicated earlier, we also have to go through and make sure that there's proper controls in case, you're not just being lucky that the compliance is working, that if the compliance, that there's controls that would identify and check it to make sure that it is working. The majority of the IDEA is mostly all payroll driven. And so it was a lot of payroll testing that we did for the IDEA program here. So no findings. We were able to issue the clean opinion on compliance and also the effectiveness of the control program through there. So we have this, and then we'll also have our data collection form, which we will upload to the federal government. That will be done after all the reports are issued to the state of Michigan. Then within 30 days, that all gets uploaded to the federal government. The next page here, I won't go into detail here, but the next couple pages, this is what we refer to as our CFA, or the Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards. This is just the list of all the federal dollars that you get. So it's very interesting to kind of go through here and read all the dollars. But this would be the list of the federal programs that we have to go through annually and review them, and we as auditors would go through and risk rate them, and that's how we determine what programs we have to test. All right, and now the end of audit letter. So this letter I'd like to refer to, this is our end of audit letter. So if you recall, in the beginning of the audit, we send the letter out to the board to say, we're here. If anybody has any questions, if they have any concerns, if they want to reach out to us, this is our contact information. Here's how we are going to go about our audit. This is where we see and think some of our risks are. This is the end of the audit letter. So this is our opportunity to say to you, did everything go as planned? If things do not go as planned, this is our letter to tell you if they do not go as planned. So if we have to change our plan, if we have disagreements with management, if we identify any journal entries, if we had any awareness that things were not going the way that they should be going, this would be the letter that we would provide to the board to say, we are putting it in writing that they did not go correct. So this letter is very boring. It is standard wording because it went according to plan. So this is a great letter, so I will just go real quickly down here. So again, the audit is done under auditing standards. Everything went according to plan in the timing of the audit. There were no new accounting policies were adopted this year. On the second page, as Tom talked about in the financial statements, the most sensitive estimate in your financial statements is the pension, it's the OPEB. That's consistent with what it's traditionally been in the past, so we want to bring that up to your attention. We did not encounter any difficulties with management. We were not aware of any type of opinion shopping or disagreement. We had no arguments with management throughout the course of the audit. We did not identify any errors. We did not post any journal entries, nor did we have any past journal entries, which would mean We didn't even come up with anything that said like, all right, it's wrong, but it's not materially wrong, and so we're just gonna pass on it. We did not even encounter something like that. If we did, it would still need to be in the audit, or in this letter, so we didn't come up with anything to that matter either. We did not have any significant findings. We did not, as I indicated earlier, we did not have any findings in the single audit, nor did we identify any type of findings when we went through and we assessed the financial department as far as financial controls. So we didn't, as we were assessing our financial controls, we didn't find anything that said like, we think that we had suggestions of segregation of duties, or we didn't think anything really would be like, we think things should be changed. So we would not have had any opinions where there should be some findings. So that would be in this letter as well. And the only thing open in this letter right now would be the date of the, so that is still open. So once we finalize, I think we have our open items wrapped up. So we're waiting to finalize the opinion letter, and then we will fill in these dates, and then we'll be all set. So that wraps up our presentation. So at this point, we will pause and see if anybody has any questions that we will try to address.
Mrs. Burton?
I don't have a question. Thanks to you both and to the team at Plant Moran. I know the audits are not easy. It's not easy for our team, and it's not easy for you guys. It's a lot of very intense work. I just wanted to express our appreciation to Allison and to the entire team, not only in our finance department, but primarily there, but throughout our district, our staff that all feed information into that finance department. We've all looked at very significant districts that are neighbors of ours who are not enjoying this kind of audit report. And I just don't want it to go without saying, and you'll probably hear it more than once tonight. But thank you very much for the solid work that you do on a very, very consistent basis. As a board member, I don't have to lay my head down and wonder what's going on and what I might wake up to tomorrow morning, because we have such confidence in you, and it's not just blind confidence, but after year of unmodified opinions with a firm, the caliber of Plant Moran, we are just thrilled. So thank you to you and your team.
Thank you.
Mrs. Frank?
I just have one quick question on
Yes.
page 7. And this might be an Allison a question, I'm not sure. So Tom, you talked a little bit about the subsequent year's budget with that 1.3 million, 1.4, sorry.
Do you want me to speak to that?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So that would be, in fact, I've got it in front of me. What was adopted by the board was estimated revenue of $175.6 million. So that's what we expect to be getting in through state aid and through the property taxes. And what we had budgeted for expenditures was $177 million. So they recognize that what you've budgeted in expenditures exceeds what you've budgeted for revenue, so we're going to assign a portion of your fund balance that are going to cover those expenditures, because you don't have revenue to cover those expenditures. So those are always obviously conversations that we have with the board to make sure, we've been targeting within the 15 to 20%, but we also know that there's many things that we could spend our funds on instead of just growing. The goal isn't to grow an unlimited pot of funds, it's to use it on the kids in front of us. And so that's purposely put in here a planned use of those funds, and we're very conscious that you cannot continue to, we can't continue to bring you a budget that exceeds revenue, but when there is a good reason to use that fund balance, we think it's very appropriate to bring it to the board and discuss it with you and ultimately seek your approval for it. So that's what the assigned fund balance is that planned use of fund balance in our 24-25 budget.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Tom.
So, my question and comments is, Crystal hit it right on the head there, I think we need to, and I'm not sure how to make this really clear. We talk about it, but that, and we kind of already went over some of it, but that because we have a fund balance and we have to have a balanced budget, it allows us to be able to overspend what we project our revenues are by $1.4 million. If we did not have that fund balance, we would have to cut from our budget $1.4 million worth of expenditures. Now, we always come in, or most of the time, we come in favorable, which means at the end of the 2024-25 school year, we may indeed come in favorable, even though we planned for fund usage, which is being, as accountants, we're conservative, right? We go on the conservative side. So with that in mind, I think it's important to bring out that we're able to over budget, even though we'll probably come in better than expected, but we couldn't do that without a fund balance.
Absolutely.
I think also it needs to be noted that we really are not, as Crystal brought up, and you, Allison, you brought up, we are not, you know, we spent a lot of years adding to our fund balance to bring us up to this point. But at this point, we're comfortable and not over comfortable, right? If we're coming in at 16%, we're not hoarding money to 19 or 20 or 30%, right? We're saying we're comfortable, we've got that base level, and we're really making sure that we're spending the dollars that we receive now on the students that we have now. We've gotten to that point where we can do that. And so, again, you know, $30 million seems like an awful lot of money at the end of the day when you're just listening to this and you hear, oh, we've got $33 million that we carry forward, right? That we want to be really clear that that's really not that much money in light of what we do as the district and where we need to be. Absolutely. So I know I'm really harping on this, but I think it's probably one of the more important things that we're going to present next week is that we are being frugal and intentional and responsible, judicious on what we're doing and making sure that we're doing the best we can for our students, but we're also protecting the district in case that we do have something impactful, and again, really making it clear that we can overspend on our budget. And I know that sounds really negative, but in layman's terms, right, we're really saying we can overspend on our budget because we have some savings. We probably are going to come in better, so we're comfortable doing that. But we couldn't do that without the fund balance.
Absolutely. Yep. And we even see that in that first kind of look at what the December budget amendment will look like. We're already recognizing that our revenue collection is actually going to be more than what's been, budgeted and approved for by the board. So, but you're right, it gives us more flexibility. And I think just as people, I'm guessing none of us have $33 million in our bank account. Like, it's just kind of mind-boggling numbers. But like when you do put it in terms of, and I don't know that it was in this packet, but you'll see it in our final, in the financial packet of how many weeks of spending that represents, and it's roughly 10 weeks.
Yeah.
So you think about like for our own personal finances, and we're not just taking care of ourselves, we have 2,000 employees that we have to, consider and plan for. So when we think about in your personal finances, would you want any less than 2 months of an emergency fund? No. Nope. And we've seen it. We saw it with the pandemic. We had, we were told it was May, I think end of May, that plan on our per pupil cut, it's coming. And it was, okay, well, if you don't have a savings, what do? You make drastic decisions. We didn't have to make drastic cuts, we were able to write it out and see what it would be because we have a savings account. So there's definitely, you definitely can't, underestimate what the power of having a fund balance does and what it can
And
do
I
for us.
think part of it too goes to what Mrs. Burton said is 95% of our budget is
Yep.
personnel. So if you're cutting $1 or $2 million out of our budget at the beginning of the year to make it balanced, because we run our fund balance to zero, right? Then we have to lay those people off
Yep.
rather than keeping them. And even if we do come in better, where we could have kept those people, or we get to a point where we could have those people, we're already way too far down the road to rehire any of that staff. So really, part of this is protecting our staff and making sure that we don't have to make those major cuts every school year in order to balance our budget. There's really not anywhere else to cut. Right, we're, and it's not as bare bones as we were for a while, but there's not 5% of the budget, there's not a whole lot of space to cut. So really maintaining this fund balance is really what we need to do in order to protect our employees as best as possible, to make sure we don't have to do those pink slips. I don't know if we still call them that, but our pink slips in the spring, right, in order to make sure that we can get through. So I think this is very important that we're able to do this for our staff, and hopefully it gives some of our staff members some peace of mind that we're not running so close that, we have to make those really, really tough decisions. Not that we don't have to maintain and right-size the district, but that we don't have to let people go when we would otherwise keep staff members on. Mrs. Burton.
Just one, excuse me, one tag on for what Mrs. Botfield was saying. Even though we have allowed ourselves next year to, as you put it, dip into our savings, we have a finite amount. That's the 1.4, up to that, but we are not, it's not an open book to.
Open checkbook.
Yeah, not an open checkbook, just dig in there. But we have an up to amount that we're allowed to use.
Yep. Are there any other questions? So I think we're comfortable with our presentation for next week on what we're gonna bring, and maybe some of the I know we usually try and come up with a couple of talking points because we've already gone through a lot of the deep dive on this at the last this meeting and the last meeting.
And we will, so you'll see, and the community can find on our website the full financial statement, so you can go through every single one of our reports. But what we'll have for our regular board meeting, of course, in the packet will be the full financial statements, but we'll go over a PowerPoint that Plant Moran has put together for us that's really the key highlights, even more abbreviated than what we've covered tonight.
Okay, and I think the community can find all this information under the transparency tab, and that's right on the front of the, is that correct, Mrs. Smith?
It's a little, a little link that if you click on there, so right now they'll see last year's financial statements, and then as soon as they're approved by the board and we have the finals, then we'll post those on the transparency page.
Okay, so these financial statements will show probably after next week's board meeting?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, perfect. Do you guys have anything else that you want to go over? I want to thank you both very much for providing this, and also for being so gracious to come to our board meetings in the evenings when we talk a lot, and hanging out with us and giving us all this great news.
No problem.
Appreciate it very much.
Any questions, just feel free to reach out. Okay.
We appreciate the relationship, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that concludes Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonifield. I was waiting for that statement. All righty, we're going to go ahead and move on to 6, our Policy Committee, and I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Frank.
Hello.
Hello.
We already have Mr. Etu sitting in the chair and ready to
I'm
go
ready.
to board policy IKF, school stores.
I
Mr.
am
Etu.
ready. Yes, this is Board Policy IKF, school stores. If you look, it was originated in 1988 and reviewed in 2014. So we took a look at it this past month and made some updates, as you can see, with the policy that's in your board book as of right now. Would you like me to take time and read through it? Do a first read? Okay. IKF, Instructional Program, School Stores. The superintendent or designee shall be authorized to establish school stores for the purpose of the sale of school supplies, school and/or district spiritware and merchandise, and food and beverage. Items for sale by the school store must be in compliance with district policy and state and federal law, and approved by the Director of Secondary Programs and District Services or designee. We strike through a few sentences there and move to the bottom, where we add accounting procedures for the school stores will align with best practices as outlined by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, GASB, and as approved by the Chief Financial Officer. Sales reports will be provided monthly to the Chief Financial Officer or designee. And we do have a legal reference at the bottom there for Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act of 2010.
Are there any questions about this policy? Any questions or concerns about this policy we talked about last time at our study session? Anything? Sorry, Ms. Bonifant.
Mr. Etu.
Yes.
You mentioned GASB in here, and so we just had our auditors here. So I am assuming that these funds run through the district, and as such, these are on the menu of audited items and are included in, probably in the procedures and.
Yep, for, at least for the last 10 years, if not longer. All of the district expenditures and revenues run through our main bank account. So all of those transactions come through our office and have another set of eyes on them, so we make sure that they're appropriate and they're following all of our policies. So those run through, and then same with the sales reports. We remit the sales tax on behalf of the school stores, so they are monthly sending us their sales reports so we can keep an eye on the activities. So, yep.
Mrs. Burton?
Along the line of this, where it says the last line, sales reports are provided monthly, are the expense reports also?
So the expenditure report.
Or is that part of sales reports?
In essence, they don't have, because that comes to us on an every transaction basis, there isn't necessarily a monthly specific list of all the expenditures.
Right.
Oh, yeah. So every single transaction comes through our office for approval before any funds are dispersed. So we see those for every
Okay.
transaction. So that sales report is showing us how much sales they've made to the students.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then that tells us then how much we have to remit to the state for sales tax. So the sales reports are really what's been sold within the store.
Got it.
Not necessarily what they've expended for their products, but that, like I said, comes to us, every single transaction comes to us for review before those funds are dispersed.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I don't know this. Is that better, that last sentence, better in the administrative procedures, or do you not foresee any reason why it would not come to monthly? Like, I'm just thinking about in a year, if there's an automated system that they don't have to, I don't know. Do we want to
Yeah.
put that, or is it
I think
best to
it's-
put in here?
I think it's safe because it's dictated by the state how often we
Okay.
remit sales tax. So I can't see them changing that. I can't see them being more lenient with us and telling us that you don't have to send it as much. So
Okay.
I think it's definitely safe
Safe.
to include in there if we wanted to.
Good, okay, good. Okay, we'll put that on the agenda for our first reading for the meeting, okay, the board meeting, okay.
Thank you.
Perfect, moving right along. Look at this team moving right along. The second one is going to be administrative procedure 2. Are we starting with administrative statewide assessment programs? Okay,
So Administrative Procedures Instructional Program II on high school testing. So we talked about this at the last committee of the whole, and there were some things that we decided that we wanted to change, and then we talked again about it at the last study session. So we have changed candidates' ability to students. So we changed the word to student throughout the administrative procedures. We changed it to our counseling office because that's what we call it, not our, I forget what the word in the last one was. Guidance office. And then the last paragraph we talked about at the study session. So I'd just like to read that to make sure I captured what we talked about. The Advanced Placement Program gives students the opportunity to pursue college-level studies while still in secondary school. So we ended that sentence, then said, students could also receive college credit based on their score on the AP assessment for each course. The program currently provides descriptions and examinations for 39 introductory college courses. So that was that last paragraph we talked about.
And any questions on that? Any other questions, Mrs. Bonnefield?
Should, instead of high school in the title, should it say secondary school? Do we reference high school?
No.
You can't get it in middle school, though.
These are all tests that are
These are-
given at the high school level only.
Yes.
Okay.
Anything else? And these are just administrative procedures, so they don't go any further?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Okay. And are you sticking around for Board Policy IF, Instructional Resources?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
So Board Policy IF, so we originally were not going to make any changes to the policy, but while we were working on the administrative procedures, which was updating copyright law and fair use, we decided to add a recommended statement onto Board Policy IF that states the board recognizes that the United States Code makes it illegal for anyone to duplicate copyrighted materials without permission. So this instructional program, board policy talks about providing the materials, equipment, and other resources, a technology network, and related resources, consultative assistance, and auxiliary support personnel to teachers and administrators within a budget limitation where appropriate. So the connection that this admin procedure was to this board policy, we talked about just adding a statement that connected copyright law to that board policy. So that's why we added that statement.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Any questions on that one? Yeah, Mr. Johnson.
Question, Mrs. O'Brien, I'm just thinking, shouldn't we maybe add a legal reference for the,
Oh, you're right. I have a cross. You are right. I need a legal reference,
okay,
which will have the copyright law.
okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. And that is going to go for a first reading.
Correct.
Okay. At the meeting. Okay, perfect. And then, excuse me, the administrative procedures for IF.
So administrative procedure IF, it is instructional resources, copyright law, and fair use. So I utilized Neola and some other online updates for copyright law. So this is from 2001, and we, obviously, copyright law is actually, okay, this is a very squeaky table. This law is been in place for a long time, but it has added and made changes based on technology and instructional resources. So what I did during my study of copyright law was I broke this.
And you're still awake.
This administrative, it's been a little while since I did that. I broke this administrative procedure into two. This first one, just the plain IF, talks about copyright law on district purchased materials. So if we purchase a consumable student workbook is a great example. We're not allowed to copy that consumable workbook. But sometimes when we purchase a textbook program, they give you a copyable book of assessments or extra work for students, extra practice or differentiated practice. And so I took what I found and broke that down into the first, section of administrative procedures. And then the second one, I put all the other copyright law. So utilizing music in our programs or in our classrooms, videos, making a copy of any digital resource that we currently use, computer programs, images. I mean, it's very lengthy, and actually it has 4 pages of references at the end. And so it just made most sense to me to break it into 2, and that's what I'm recommending.
Okay. Any questions on the administrative procedure? This administrative procedure, it is a ton of work.
Happy to
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. Okay.
And happy to have it done.
Happy to have it done. Then administrative procedure IFA. In that administrative procedure IF was just for board information, nothing else? Okay. Administrative procedure IFA.
So IFA instructional programs, Mr. Clan, who is our technology supervisor for the district, and I went through all 4 of the IFA administrative procedures, and Mrs. Jenkins helped with the last one on the website. Mr. Clan believes that our student LiveNet access policy, which is IFA 1, is current and does not need to be changed. IFA 2 is our staff LiveNet access policy, and again, he feels like this is our current policy and practice, so he does not recommend any changes. IFA 3 is our guest network or administrative procedures, and again, he felt like there were no needed changes, so all 3 have been reviewed and no changes are recommended. IFA 4, Mrs. Jenkins and I are making a recommendation for a change under, so this is for the district website, Part 3, student images and work. Authorization to use photographs, video clips, and audio clips of students and students working in any format to post on a teacher, school, or district website using a student's first name only is provided each year. And then we added in the electronic back-to-school packet, because we no longer do an emergency card that is paper. And then continuing, that some parents and guardians wish to, so recognizing should not be crossed out. So that is, it should be recognizing that some parents and guardians wish to restrict their student's name, image, or work from being used in the district website. We offer an opt-out form. This form is provided to parents at the registration and in the yearly back-to-school electronic packet. So that part is added and new, and should not have a period, because then it says, and is kept on file. Parents and guardians can change the restrictions at any time by coming to the school office and revising or rescinding the opt-out form.
I have a question.
Yeah, Mrs.
Sure.
Bradford.
On that, they can come to the school office. Is it on electronic, so why would they come to the school office? Am I
So-
reading that wrong?
Yep, so we collect it in our electronic back-to-school packet, but we would want them to inform at a school. So if I have decided my child is old enough and my child's teacher puts a lot of things on the website and I'd like my child to be involved, where previously maybe I was more concerned with that, you would want to inform the school that you're changing your
Oh, okay, but
desire.
they can't do that online? That's what I'm saying. Do they contact you via email, or, I
Once
mean,
they would generally, each
yeah.
school has a file and list of restricted students. So in order to change and take a student off that list, we would want to have
Perfect, okay.
in-person confirmation
Okay, yeah, I
from a
just wanted to
parent.
make sure
Yeah.
that that's not something they do online. They
No,
would come
we-
in and let
yeah,
you know.
We would
Right.
want to
Okay.
talk, yep.
After you fill out that back-to-school packet, it's done. It's not like something you can change online. Like you just do it once and it's done.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I wasn't sure how that changed.
Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, Mrs. Costa.
I'm used to seeing back to school as a one hyphenated word.
Like back hyphen to hyphen?
Yes.
Okay.
Anything else? And that is also just for board reference, and so.
Correct.
that
The
will not
changes will be
on-
made and we'll update the administrative procedures.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your work on that, Teresa. That was a labor of love or something. Thank you, and that wraps up the policy committee. President Bradford.
Why, thank you, Mrs. Frank. That was wonderful. We're going to move on to item 7, the Personnel Committee, and Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Bradford. I don't believe we have anything in personnel. Mrs. Oquist, anything to add?
We do not, Vice President Johnson.
Thank you. That concludes personnel.
Well, that was a good one. All right, moving on to 8, the Legislative Committee. This is really, we're going to turn it over to Mrs. Acosta since Mrs. Jarvis is having a nice European trip currently. So, Mrs. Acosta, do we have anything for
Thank you,
legislative?
President Bradford. To my knowledge, we don't have any items, Mrs. Oquist.
We do not, Mrs. Acosta.
And that concludes the legislative committee report.
Why, thank you, Mrs. Acosta. Well, does anybody have any other business before the board this evening? Seeing none, have a great night. We'll see you next week. Thank you for our regular meeting. Good night.